This video workshop focuses on what happens after you post on social media, the good, the bad, and the ugly of social media moderation. This is part of a series of recorded workshops on social media communications created with support from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research and the Pacific Institute on Pathogens, Pandemic, and Society. Although I hope lots of people might find this workshop helpful, the examples I'll be using are tailored for people working in government or allied government communications who use social media to share health-related information. So that's really what our focus is today. And my goals are that by the end of this video, you will be better able to recognize and understand different types of comments and commenters, to match common moderation challenges with potential actions, and to identify promising processes and strategies that might be able to support you and your organization's moderation goals. But if there's one thing I want you to take away from this workshop, it's a higher level, both and kind of message. That social media is both incredibly important and brutally challenging. We don't need to sugarcoat it here. It's so important and valuable for our public institutions to be on social media, but for the individuals and teams who work in this space, you face a lot of abuse and a lot of challenges just while doing your jobs and trying to share health information. I'm Christine Ackerley. I'm currently a Fulbright doctoral student focused on health and science communication, and I work as a communications consultant, building on 6 years of experience in health and government comms, most recently on the team of BC's Provincial Health Services Authority. I'd like to acknowledge that today I'm on the traditional lands of the First People of Seattle, the Duwamish people past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe.
And Simon Fraser University respectfully acknowledges the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Katzie, Coquitlam, Kakite, Kwantlen, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen peoples on whose unceded traditional territories our 3 campuses reside.
My personal passion is really about applying research evidence to practice and policy, whether in health or, in our case, communications. So in pulling this video together, of course I turned to the research first. But in this case, there's actually not a lot there for us. There's a lot of fascinating research that does look at addressing misinformation and disinformation. There's some that looks at policy and laws around free speech and moderating platforms like Facebook or TikTok. But from the perspective of organizations who are actually doing this moderation on our own channels, there's not a lot of research about the strategies that we can use and how that might influence discourse or commenting on the platform over time. And so to expand beyond just my experiences, I turned to some colleagues and professional communicators who do this work day in, day out. I spoke with people from PHSA, Health Canada, UBC, and other organizations, and their advice is really what enriched what I'm sharing with you today, and it means our focus is highly practical, getting some real-world expectations and options for what you can do after you post your content online. So for this workshop, we're not going to delve into the nuances of different platforms. I'm going to assume that you're posting probably across several. You know, the major ones, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, maybe TikTok. But these kind of cross-cutting things that we're going to be discussing also apply to things like YouTube comments, maybe comments on blogs or websites, if that's a thing for your organization. And this will apply for new and emerging channels too. You know, every channel has slightly different facets and technical elements of what's possible for moderation, but the same principles apply across all of them. And we're also going to specifically be focusing on how you can handle comments on your own channels and content and direct messages to your account. So that's because you can take the most action in those settings and you have the widest range of decisions. That's slightly different than strategies to address if your account is being talked about on other people's channels or in other people's content. That's for another video. But all of those caveats aside, that takes us into the first section of how do we recognize and understand different kinds of comments and commenters. There is a virtually endless range of comments that you could get on your social media, and we could slice and dice them in a whole bunch of different ways. But for our purposes today, let's just consider 3 broad categories. To start us off, there's the good faith comments and questions from people who genuinely want to hear you reply and maybe share their experiences. These are people who are asking follow-ups about content you post or sharing how something you've posted relates to them. And you can think of these people's motivation as they genuinely want to hear back from you, and they're open and happy to engage with what you have to say. For example, let's say you post about a flu shot clinic. Someone might comment to ask the hours, and their motivation is to learn the hours. Your reply would help give them some information that they're hoping for. Or maybe you're sharing about CPR awareness, bystander CPR. Someone might post a question saying, with COVID, should you still do mouth to mouth? They want to know the answer, and you could happily post a resource that informs them no, bystander CPR, in fact, now is just hands only. As a real world example, when the BC CDC posted about air pollution, this particular commenter asked about recommendations on purifiers. And it turned out the BC CDC already had a resource on their website, which they linked to, providing the commenter with the information they were hoping for. So in our ideal world, every comment would be like this, people genuinely engaging and looking for more information. And in the online environment, these kinds of comments can really feel like diamonds in the rough, or maybe needles in a haystack that you're looking for. The real questions and dialogue where the commenter is hoping that you respond with information and genuinely wants to hear what you have to say. I'd also put positive feedback in this category, which is people sharing just to say something was helpful, saying thank you, celebrating, congratulating, or saying they had some kind of good experience with your agency or program. So as one real-world example, BC Emergency Health Services, responsible for ambulances in BC, posted a story about a bystander successfully performing CPR and saving someone's life. And the comments are positive and congratulatory, just, saying it's a feel-good story, congratulating the individual. That takes us into our second big bucket, which is negative about your content or organization, but still valid and maybe even valuable. So these are commenters, we can understand them as having varied motivations. Some people might just be wanting to share or vent their frustration. They might be really encouraging your organization to change something, or raising problems or critiques with, your organization or your content. So they may indeed be looking to hear back from you as a moderator that you are listening and you're understanding and hearing their feedback. Or even if they aren't particularly interested in hearing back from you, this information can still be helpful to you and your organization. Of course, taking it with a grain of salt, because these are anonymous commenters on the internet, but using these negative comments can really help inform changes in not just your organization, but also your social media content strategy. So as an example, if you post something about, let's say, breastfeeding promotion, and you get some negative comments that the content is offending or alienating people who maybe can't or choose not to breastfeed. They say, your content is making them upset because it's implying they're bad parents. It is helpful for your organization to get that feedback and to get that breadth of audience experiences to inform your subsequent posts and to consider your messaging. So maybe that looks like adding some caveats or points to make your content more inclusive, or considering other changes that might reflect that feedback. In this bucket, I'd also put complaints about tax dollars, what tax dollars are being spent on. And you know what? That's democracy for you, right? Like some people might feel that certain campaigns or health initiatives are not good uses of public funding, and that's their prerogative. They very well might comment that. And so even if you're not representing an elected office, oftentimes these kind of democratic and values debates might play out in the comment section of your content. And people have a lot of opinions. As a public organization, it's sometimes helpful to hear that feedback. Or maybe it's not that useful or constructive, but it's harmless. It's people exercising their right to voice their opinions in a democracy. You can listen and moderate. You can take some comments seriously, and you might act on it and absorb it, take that feedback, or after assessing it, you might let it roll off your back. So as a recent real-world example, Health Canada posted this recipe for canned foods. And the comments I would put all in this kind of second bucket. None of these are particularly constructive, but it's people voicing their opinions about diet, dietary preference. It's negative to be sure, like the last comment, but nothing here is in our third bucket, or category, which is the truly problematic. These are things that go against your policy, the hate speech threats, harmful disinformation, online abuse or abusive exchanges between commenters, or just pure spam. Now, I said that our learning goal was to recognize and understand different types of comments and commenters, but this category can feel really hard to understand. There's a lot of different theories in psychology. Like for trolling, it's people looking to get a rise out of you or your followers, maybe to upset or offend. And it's a bigger question to say why they're doing this. Like maybe it's for attention, maybe it's out of boredom, maybe it's genuinely representing their beliefs. But it's ultimately impossible to really know the motivation of these commenters. If you've spent any time on the internet, you can probably think of a lot of examples of these comments. Let's say you post something about the correct doses of acetaminophen for children, and someone comments linking to a porn website or to a Bitcoin investment opportunity. Those are, pure spam that are potentially harmful to your followers or misleading. That often would go against policies that your organization has posted for social media moderation. As another example, let's say you feature a clinician who's providing gender-affirming care, and then a commenter makes a threat of violence against that individual. Those are examples of this really problematic category. Now, the overwhelming sense from people who work in communications and social media moderation is that everything has changed following the COVID pandemic, especially at this intersection of government and healthcare communications. So before spring 2022, key concerns of health authority or kind of government allied accounts were all about boosting and increasing engagement. Let's be honest, a lot of these accounts were pretty one way, just sharing information, not a lot of engagement. And so the concern was getting more comments and likes. Sure, on some topics you could always expect to get negative comments, if it's particularly sensitive or controversial. But overall, the engagement was relatively low, and of the few comments that were posted, a lot of them were those good faith questions or comments in our first category. Although I couldn't find any research to back this up, the overwhelming perception of people who are working in this space is that now everything is different. Overall commenting has skyrocketed, but with way more spam bots and trolls and negative comments. Now people ballpark that roughly 10 to 15% of all of the comments are in that first category. The legitimate questions, the positivity, the just sharing their experience kind of comments. I would guess it could be even less than 10 to 15%. And that means the vast majority of comments that we're now seeing on these kinds of accounts are in the negative or truly problematic category. And there's kind of a layer to put on top of these last two categories to consider toxicity. When I say that, I'm defining it broadly. In social media, it can be described as spreading unnecessary negativity or hate that ends up negatively affecting people who encounter it. It can also be defined as the usage of rude, disrespectful, or unreasonable language that will likely provoke or could make another user leave a discussion. So toxic I kind of consider as a layer over top of these two categories because it also depends very much on your perspective. So some people might be sharing, a really painful or uncomfortable health experience, and that might be seen as toxic from certain viewpoints, but not from others. Not all negative comments that are toxic necessarily warrant, the action that truly problematic category would have. But what's really important about toxicity is how it makes people feel, right? Your followers and, importantly, you as the moderator. And it can feel awful. Regardless of how you categorize or what actions you take, just encountering that kind of toxicity feels really bad. So considering those three categories, this probably isn't what you want to hear, but moderating and choosing actions is entirely shades of gray. It's all a gradient. There's no clear-cut answers. So you can have rules and you can have decision trees, but when there's so many contextual factors at play, that's what makes moderating really hard. But that's a high-level lay of the land of what to expect. Probably just labeling, what you already see and feel. But now let's move on to how we can match some common challenges in each of these categories with potential actions to address those challenges. So let's start with the first category, the good. right? When you see a legitimate question, what do you do then? This is really a dance of time and capacity, right? There's the capacity of your team to pull together everything you need to reply. And there's also the element of time where the value of responding or replying could potentially be diminishing the longer you take, depending on the nature of the person's question. If they're asking about an event that's happening tomorrow, replying that day might be helpful, but afterwards obviously isn't valuable. So to give you a sense of what that might look like and what's worked for other organizations, this could be actions like building a pipeline to intake comments and to evaluate what is going to have a reply. That might be you if you're a solo moderator, or that might be as a team. Then it's usually a process of looking to see if you have existing resources or previous replies that might suit the situation, like the example with the air filter earlier. And then potentially building out workflows to solicit subject matter expertise if you don't have a ready-made answer. So that can look like reaching out to experts in your organization or in other departments, crafting the answer, and then often there's a process that people find very helpful to have kind of an approval and second set of eyes on the answer that's crafted. Then you post the reply after all of that work, and it's important to continue moderating because it is possible, if potentially rare, for commenters to actually edit their post after you reply, which can put your reply out of context, or additional people might comment back and forth with your reply, and that might warrant further engagement. In this kind of positive category of actions, you can also consider workflows for journalists and media. Often this involves different teams or different processes to kind of centralize and triage requests from media and different kinds of responses. Now, considering the second bucket of negative but, let's say, legitimate feedback, that's thinking about processes to gather and potentially share that appropriately with operational units or social media content creators who may benefit from knowing that these kinds of negative comments are appearing online. So a lot of times we, post the content and move on, but getting that feedback, even if it's negative about something operational or programmatic or about the content itself, can really help your organization inform its future work, even if it doesn't feel great to see. So for the negative to ugly, there's a range of options you can consider at the very basic level. And I'm going to spend the most time here because I think this is where most moderators face the hardest decisions about what they should do. So your first option is to reply. This can be the gut reaction that you have when you see just complete awful content being commented. You see misinformation or disinformation that's just so egregiously wrong. And there's a mentality that is important of detecting and correcting misinformation and disinformation. There's a whole video on that in the series. But on social media moderation, there's a lot to consider with responding. Oftentimes, responding to someone who's clearly trolling and looking to get a rise is a no-win situation because they are trying to bait you into a conversation. And once you're in that, it's hard, if not impossible, to gracefully exit, right? These people are not going to say, oh, thank you for replying, you changed my mind. It's just going to continue going on and on in a way that often gives more airtime and more visibility to these comments than if you took any of the other actions below. Now, what's interesting to note is, while there's a lot of advocacy for the importance of health authorities or government organizations addressing misinformation, oftentimes directly replying to people's comments is not effective. In practice, most social media moderators and experienced communications people do not advocate for this approach because with the platforms of the algorithm and with the goals and motivations of people who post these comments, often you're giving this information more of a spotlight by replying than by taking any of the other options we're going to discuss below. So then we move to ignore. I would say this is hands down the most popular and most used approach by professionals working in this space. Because there's no graceful way to exit replies and commenting, oftentimes just ignoring it is in fact the best response, even if it can kind of feel wrong. There's an adage you might have heard of don't feed the trolls on social media. Often trolls or bot accounts are actually repeat commenters who you will notice as a moderator comment on almost every single one of your posts. They're advocating a certain topic, they're looking to get a rise. But what's interesting to think about is how current algorithms and displays across all of these platforms mean that most of your followers, the vast majority of people who might see your content on social media, will usually only see the top 2 or 3 comments under your main content. And so oftentimes these people who are posting on every single one with, irrelevant or harmful information, really don't get seen. Maybe out of tens of thousands of followers, you can look and see that they only get 10 views perhaps. And in the scheme of your social media strategy, that's probably something where you can kind of weigh the pros and cons. So ignore, very popular option, very strong one in the current context. Now, there's also the option to hide. This is when the comment is still visible to the poster and sometimes their friends, like on Facebook, but it's hidden from everyone else on your platform. This can be a really good option for things that fall in, against your policy or in that really problematic category. So super, obscene, profane, offensive, depending on how someone could read it, they might argue that it's censorship to get rid of. The hide option is great because the comment is still visible to the poster and potentially their friends, like on Facebook, but it's not visible to your other followers. And so it's not causing that kind of harm or silencing effect on other commenters or followers who would be deeply offended or hurt by these kinds of comments. And yet you're not provoking the same kind of rise or backlash from the commenter. You're not giving it more airspace by replying. So hiding can be a nice kind of middle ground option. So that takes us into, some of the more strong options to block a user and delete comments. There's always a real risk that someone who you block or a comment you delete becomes an opportunity for that person to make more noise about it. It's easy for people to screenshot things that have been, posted before but then deleted. It's easy for anybody who's blocked to simply make a new account and post again. You get accused of censorship as a moderator, even if the post is against the policy. People can make a big stink about it. And so while blocking and deleting is absolutely an option in your actions, it's one to always consider very carefully because there's often a lot more downsides and backlash from that kind of action than positives. And then you can report someone. If they're just consistently being a problem, you can get them, you can report the post and report the commenter to the broader social media platform to see if any kind of action could be taken. But again, that is not always the most effective response to these kinds of negative comments. Now, one action that could go with any of these is to use the negative comments to inform your proactive content strategy. This is a really good action to feel like you're still doing something in this toxicity while not replying to individual comments or engaging with specific commenters. So with this kind of approach, you could see the kinds of misinformation, disinformation that might be circulating on your posts, but rather than replying directly to those comments or engaging with those people, you instead use that to inspire the future posts that you make to address that kind of information head on, but also to be able to control your message. So, a lot of examples in that happen around vaccines, around, sexual education. You can see the kind of issues and problems that are arising in the comment section, and then address them proactively in the content that you're putting out in the future. People, including me, always want some kind of decision tree or algorithm. So, if you see this kind of comment, you should do this kind of action. But ultimately, it really is judgment calls and shades of gray that can change a lot over time. Depends on your context, depends on your team and the organizational goals, and all of those things can change. What also makes it almost impossible to have a kind of comprehensive decision tree is that you're always going to find unique comments to moderate that don't fit previous experiences. So special and really important cases are if someone is commenting about, self-harm or suicide. That requires a whole different process that you have to build as an organization. I already mentioned media. And then a big one is also involving employees. So whether that is comments about a specific employee, online abuse problems or complaints, Or it might be an employee commenting on your post, raising concerns or airing complaints. And that's a kind of different process where for either one, HR or management or other internal processes might need to be involved. You also want to be considering with any replies or comments the impact on other parts of your organization. So, we've been focusing on government organizations who are posting about health, but there's a lot of collaboration and kind of cross-organization dynamics that can happen. And sometimes you might need to collaborate with people from other departments than just your own. The takeaway from trying to match common types of comments you might see with potential actions is that case by case, each of those decisions is really a judgment call, and it's shades of gray based on your unique situation. So for our interactive activity today, I want you to imagine this situation, but we're going to structure it so that you can really think through what options you have. So let's say your organization posted content promoting physical activity in some way. So you're promoting an option to access a new resource, or you're just advocating for the benefits of physical activity, and you get this comment. Now I want you to take the next minute to think through, maybe you jot it down on paper, maybe you type it out on a notepad of your computer, but please think through first what your gut reaction to this comment is. Second, list out what potential actions you could take as a social media moderator of an account. Note which you would choose given your organizational context, and then list out a couple benefits and drawbacks of your chosen strategy. And so as an example of how I responded to this activity, my gut reaction is anger, it's frustration, and I would want to reply and refute this commenter based on not just my own opinion, but also scientific evidence. But we know there's a lot of other options of actions to take. So reply is one of them in the mix, but I could also ignore it. I could hide the comment. In this case, and based on the organizations that I've worked with, it's a bit borderline and not really into the clearly delete, clearly block, just based on the policies that I've worked with. And we know those have a lot of downsides as well. And so I think those are the three options, reply, hide, or ignore. And from those three, I would probably choose ignore. Now, this has the con of being frustrating to me as the moderator because you're letting this toxic content continue to live online. But I think in this case, for my organizations or ones I've worked at, pros outweigh the cons in the sense it's not giving this more of a platform, it's not giving it more airtime, and it's not engaging and further infuriating a commenter to post more. Now, this answer and this action could depend very much on the goals of your organization. For example, if you were really focused as a strategic priority to address weight stigma or to advocate for body positivity, and a lot of your followers are very interested in that topic and passionate about it, it very well might be appropriate to take one of the other actions if that aligns with your organizational goals. So this is where the contextual considerations really come into play and why we're going to do another example, just a hypothetical think through. Let's say your organization does some content from a clinician who is a sleep expert promoting healthy sleep. Pretty innocuous content, but then you get this comment. Again, I want you to take a minute to jot down or type out what your gut reaction is, what options you have available, which one you would choose for your organization, and the pros and cons of that choice. So my gut reaction is, again, anger, disappointment, wanting to jump in there and defend this clinician who's simply trying to promote a healthy message to the public. Options, in addition to replying, include, again, hide the comment, ignore it, potentially block or delete because this is pretty abusive language towards this individual who, is an employee. In terms of the direction I would take, in this case for my organizations, would probably hide the comment. So this would stop, hopefully mitigate future abuse where the commenter doesn't feel like they're being censored. They're not going to make a big stink about it. But it also reduces the harm to the person because this comment isn't visibly sitting, beneath their picture on social media forever. They and all of your followers, except the one commenter, cannot really see it. And so I think the benefits in this way outweigh the downsides. A downside is the comment is still out there, right? And you aren't feeling like you're taking direct action to address it. You're not refuting them. You're not defending the person. And that can feel really bad. But I think that the benefits in this case for the organizations I've been at would be on the side of hiding it rather than getting into an argument. Which takes us into how to build processes and strategies that can help you and your organization reach your moderation goals while you're making all of these tough judgment calls and day-to-day decisions. This is really what we've been leading up to, considering you and your organization's specific goals and offering just some ideas and ways that you might be able to better support them. But just like a building project or a reno, everyone has different constraints, different resources, which means you'd select different tools. So I'm going to run through 5 kind of cross-cutting considerations that have worked well for organizations in the government and healthcare space, and you can consider how each one may or may not apply in your context. The first, and I think the most important consideration, is how your moderation processes can support employee well-being. I talked a lot about toxicity and that negativity, and that was a really strong recurring theme in the people I spoke with, that it takes a toll on the moderators, the people who are looking at these comments and sifting through to try to find the real questions or the real problems that need to be acted upon. Regardless of if it's an individual or a team, having options for breaks, for built-in redundancy, for rotation of moderation duties is so important when people are working in this really challenging and toxic environment. Oftentimes, social media hasn't been taken super seriously by, any organization, but especially our government or health organizations. And too often it's being done by someone who's working off the side of their desk. They have a lot of other responsibilities, or potentially falling to a single social media manager who's working alone. And that kind of 24-hour pressure to be monitoring and responding to comments is overwhelming to anyone. You're just flooded with toxicity, you're inhaling it in. So our teams and organizations really need to prioritize having ways for people to step away, to take breaks, to rotate on and off moderation duties. Now, other things that can help as you're hopefully, building up a team and building up these processes is having a policy to point to. Now, these social media policies do very, very little to nothing to dissuade a troll from posting, but they can help depersonalize decisions because it's not you just making the judgment call. You can turn to the policy and have that as kind of a defense or a shield about why you're taking certain actions to, let's say, hide a post or potentially delete a post. You know, it's one thing to say don't take it personally and to develop a thick skin, but that is really hard. And so having a team and having policies to support you can help. Another thing that can help is having boundaries in terms of posting hours that the account will be monitored, as well as having an autoresponder to direct messages. So this kind of sets some limits and takes away the pressure that you're going to be responding and moderating all the time. And for example, a lot of health and government organizations will say they only respond in business hours, 9 to 5 on weekdays. But really, this is just first and foremost focusing on how you can make social media moderation sustainable. Whether that's you advocating for yourself as a solo practitioner, or you're on a team and you're kind of building up processes so that you all get the breaks and the boundaries that you need from doing this really challenging work. Second is looking outside the immediate social media moderation team to set and manage expectations within your organization. So that looks like preparing and then being prepared to support people who you might be featuring on your social media, staff members, experts, for the kind of toxicity they might expect, and counseling them on what to do if really crappy comments happen. Sometimes, all of our gut reactions might be to reply, respond, defend ourselves, maybe demand an apology, but oftentimes those conversations with people who might be featured on your channel might look like supporting them to appreciate, the bigger perspective of the online environment and help coach them through your recommended response, which in many cases might be to ignore the comment, for example. This also means managing up, where a lot of senior leaders might not be facing this day to day, might not fully understand what kind of comments you can expect online, and might be deeply disappointed or alarmed if they see these negative comments popping up on, an initiative that they care about. Now, public officials are well aware of the kind of negative comments you might get, but a lot of times folks who've been thrust into the spotlight in this kind of government health space are not people who have typically sought out public engagement. They're scientists, researchers, epidemiologists. And so being able to support your leaders in terms of what to expect and what actions to take is also an important piece and strategy that's worked well for many organizations. So third is don't speed. Now, this can sound a little bit silly because government has already a reputation for potentially being slow and bureaucratic, and social media is a really fast-paced environment where you want that, two-way dialogue and conversation. But the overwhelming advice from everyone I spoke to, and from my own experiences, is that when you are going to reply, taking the time to collaborate, to involve the right people, to get a second set of eyes on the intended response, is worth the time and the delay to reply in most cases. I think having this bias towards care and a bias towards collaboration with different subject matter experts is especially important for authoritative government organizations, because anything you post can be immediately screenshotted and become permanent, right? So even if you can edit it or delete a comment, any reply you share, you can assume it's permanently out there, and so it's worth the time to make it right. Fourth is to develop and then continually improve systems. And by systems, I mean both technology and processes on your team. So given the volume of content and the moderation demands on most teams, having a centralized place where all of your channels and all of the replies are together is really important, right? So a lot of teams use something like Hootsuite, but there's other options like Sprout Social, Buffer, Agorapulse. It doesn't really matter what platform you use, but the goal is to have a single service to pull all of your channels into one place, and so that your hopefully team or individual moderator can see everything together, centralized and triage. This kind of system can also mean banking stock replies. If you tend to get similar types of questions about similar topics or resources, you can stash, typical replies and edit them as appropriate. This means developing and articulating guides to decision-making and onboarding, but crucially to update them over time. A lot of social media policies haven't been updated for 10 years, and think about how much social media and the internet has changed. So for your internal team systems, it's not about just writing a static document and letting it live. It's about continually revisiting and asking, how are these processes working for our team? Are they efficient? Are they effective? And are they supporting our team's well-being, and updating them? And then fifth, and flowing out of that, is to continually evaluate your goals for why you are on social media. This is more of an organization or a team conversation than for individual moderators. But for you, if you are moderating, being super clear on what is your organization even doing on social media? Because I hope and I suspect there is a reason, but those reasons and goals can change over time, right? And so keeping really clear on why you're doing this work, the audience and the public that you're serving, why you're trying to get out there and engage, can really help put in perspective when you're monitoring such crappy comments. Often our followers will only see a couple comments under each post because the rest are hidden as they're scrolling through. And your overall social media strategy can help you maintain perspective in the sense of seeing it as your audience sees it. So just keeping an eye on how your overall social media perspective and why you're trying to engage people can really help you when you're then in the weeds of content moderation, dealing with pretty awful considerations, to have a bigger picture, depersonalize it, and kind of take a breath and step away. So to conclude, we've done a brief overview of the different types of comments and commenters that you might expect to see, potential actions you can take to match with different kinds of comments, and then some processes and strategies you can consider to help advance you and your organization's moderation goals. Remember to check out the other videos in this series, all of which focus on government and allied government organizations using social media for health. And don't lose heart. Absolutely advocate for intentional and better systems to improve moderation and to survive as a moderator, but also keep that big picture in mind. Social media is a significant communications revolution. It's allowed our organizations to speak with our public and our audiences basically directly, at low to no cost, and that never existed before. It's an amazing opportunity. It absolutely comes with a lot of challenges that now individuals have, a virtually unmoderated voice on the internet, but that chance to engage is absolutely worth working on and worth continuing. So thank you so much for your time today.